Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
Now we're back in China to look at the latest development in this country, where the Chinese authority has reaffirmed that it's going to focus on its own affair, irrespective of the trade tensions. Now, what will be the impact of these on the global development? We're being joined by Dr. Idahosa Osamhanze, who is a policy development expert. Glad to have you join us this morning.
To have you, Doctor.
Good to see you again.
My pleasure to be here. Great Nigeria.
Yeah, I love that slogan. Yes. I was expecting it. All right. Let's look at what is playing out, in the midst of the geopolitical tension, trade tension that is playing out in the global economy. China has maintained a position. In fact, China seems to be talking tough now, that irrespective of this, he will focus on his own affair. In fact, let me quote a Chinese authority to buttress this conversation. It says, as long as we do our things well, we can ensure the national economy can run smoothly and steadily move forward. It's saying as long as we do our thing well, we ensure I move forward, and then we are focusing on our own affairs in the face of rising trade tensions. How do you react to it? Does it sound like a statement showing more of confidence or more of survivor, or a generic kind of statement to other nations, or sending signals? How do you view this kind of statement?
You see, it is always good to put such conversation in perspective, and that's to understand that since 1948, really, from the time of Chairman Mao Zedong, who really came to shape the policy and the economy of China in terms of advancing socialism or communism, as you may call it. A lot has happened in China, and China has always focused on itself. Really. So that's a statement of fact. Yes, the fact that China has a lot to do with the country outside of the world does not mean that it's not prioritizing itself. And you know that Chairman had to shut down China for 30 years to develop a new language and develop a new culture. So all the interactions with the entire world changed for a period of 30 years. And then they evolved. And then they built a unity, which of course we are seeing what is happening today. You see, I think this is also against the backdrop of the fact that you are having people with an alternative leadership style, which is different from what is in the West, which is really a problem, because it's the West that is worried about China, not China about itself. IMF, they are worried that how can China be making this fundamental growth without necessarily following the convention of Western capitalist democracy, and yet they are making success. So that seems to be defying what they feel is the only working system in the world. But China is saying, look, we know our problem, so we deal with our problem. And when they had the population surge, what did they do? They put a kind of incentive to ensure that the population was controlled.
Yes.
And this birth control population came by China and said, look, every family one child. Now, China is dealing with that issue because if you look at it, the workforce between age 15 and 65 in China is shrinking because you're having more people, so population is declining. And what China is doing, China is also investing so much now to encourage younger Chinese who are already well used to the one child or no child syndrome to have more children so that they can also pump up and build up the workforce and the rest of all that. But I think the worry really for the Western countries on China is the fact that, oh, you are doing well at home, but outside, but at home you are not doing so well. Because while the whole world was thinking about inflation, in China it was deflation. And while people are thinking about raising rates, China is dropping rates. So they're working contrary to what is happening in the world. So what China's authorities are saying is that we know ourselves, we focus on ourselves, we do business the way we feel them, and as long as we are doing the right thing, we are on course. And I think IMF also had affirmed that China can stumble, but they will not fall.
Interesting.
So what are the likely consequences of this shift, as regards global supply chains?
No. There's not going to be any significant impact. You see,
Really?
China is also preparing for the worst. Don't forget that it's also the US year of election. And if you've been following the conversation as it is today, really, the Republicans had been touting the electorate in the US that there's a need to reclaim America. And so you're talking about American first. And if you were following the conversation at that convention venue, what was really sounding out was the fact that Donald Trump says American for American first. We're going to put heavy tariff on goods from China so that we can grow our local factory. So every thinking human being will be thinking, so if this market closes, what's going to be the next alternative? Yes, they don't know who's going to win. The Democrat has swapped their key figure on the ballot. Now, campaign is about starting 4 months from now. We will determine who becomes the president of America. That will go a long way to also determine how China is going to play in the world. Because if Chinese goods are not entering America, so what else is going to happen? So this is what we're seeing a shift. So let's build our home base. So even if they are not buying, we can buy our things. So if we empower our consumer, and then of course, growth is not driven by state investment in capital alone, and you're also seeing that the consumer is having more power to buy, then of course we'll be able to survive in the midst of the geopolitics that you see playing out globally.
Now, in the midst of this geopolitics, let's look at the concern here as regards economic fragmentation that may exist. You have China seeming to be talking like saying China first, and you have America on the other hand saying American first. I hope Nigeria is not going to fall into that and say Nigeria first. But even if that is not said, it's a given that you prioritize your interests as a nation in any deal or in any foreign relations. But my question is, or my worry is, will that not further lead to the divide or the economic fragmentation that the globally have been spoken against? How can this be managed in a way that it will not cause further realliance or alliance as regards nations when it comes to economic relations?
Yeah, but you see, the globalists at a certain point in time wanted to see that we have just in one world that's dominated principally by the Western powers. And these, of course, didn't work out. And of course, you see, that almost came to fruition. At a certain point in time, if you check out, you see that the World Economic Forum had written a constitution for the Federation of Earth with state structures. Now, all of this, we're moving toward globalism, where you find that you have one world that is controlled from one point. Now, you see people in the East, they say, look, this can't happen. And that is, of course, you see, when Donald Trump came and said, look, we don't need a global world. We are, first of all, president of our countries. Because if you look at it in the real terms of the word, international relation is an extension of domestic relations. So I come into a relation with you because I want my people to be good. So I don't come into relations with you because I want other people to be good. So when people pursue foreign policy or foreign trade, what the governments are doing is thinking, how do we make the life of the people in our environment better off? And I think that's what Europe is pursuing. They have always pursued this agenda of having a Europe that is good for its citizens, but you see, at the expense of the other people in the world, which of course was what colonization was all about, that Europe took everything from the other part of the world to make their citizens look good. Now the people of this other world are saying, look, we also need to be good. So China has become a model for growth, an alternative pattern, because you are looking at an economy that over 3 decades had grown at about 5% of GDP. Now you're seeing a Chinese economy that is about $18.3 trillion economy as of today. So this is huge for America. And that was why Putin was saying that the NATO attack on Russia was not actually an attack on Russia, but it's actually an attack on China. Because America is seeing how to lower the Chinese dominance. But you also see, you look at it, what is fracturing. BRIC is getting stronger, getting bigger, and even suggesting alternative to world trade. All these are dynamics that are going to play out as the world evolves.
All right, let's look at what China is doing in a peculiar way that we could draw reference from as domestic production. Looking at they call it a form of special tariffs as regards the issue of production of electric vehicles, which has also led to some sanctions from the U.S. on China. Now, let's draw some lessons for the approach to local production and productivity in China. How can that be of lesson to Africa and the rest of the world?
Well, we've told this story over and over again, and I think it will not be sounding like a broken record, speaking it again. Yeah. You know, about 20 years ago, Chinese people sat down in a room and they were asking their businessmen. You see, we've seen a trend globally in the 80s. Our company moved to Japan and built the economy of Japan. And then, of course, the middle class and high income class grew very significantly, and labor became very expensive. That became a problem. And when, of course, in the 90s, this shifted to the Asian tigers, the Malaysia, Indonesia became the new attraction. Company moves out from Japan and they went to Indonesia. They were building structures, or we see another economy emerging. And now what happened? You saw that the economy of these Asians grew up. What will happen? Income also soared. So the cost of paying for workforce increased also. So the thing they ran away from Europe and America came to Japan, left Japan, came to, and now China asked themselves, what are we going to do? Are we going to fold our hand and see that labor also go up and the companies move to other places, maybe Africa or thereabouts? And then they said to themselves, what's the problem? The problem is workforce, labor costs. Because if you are prospering, definitely workers will ask for more pay. And as workers ask for more pay, condition of living get higher. So the cost of production will also increase, and therefore we will not be competitive. What's the solution? At the time that humanoids were coming into technology, robotics was happening, Chinese invest heavily in robotics, hugely. That as we speak today, over 60 to 70% of workforce in Chinese factory are robots who don't ask for higher wages. When there is surplus or glut in the market, they turn off the button. So this has been able to stabilize cost of production in China. And I think the West must understand this dynamics. And this is people who are proactive. These are people who are thinking. And I think that's what African leaders should also be thinking about. That we don't necessarily, even God who created the world, created everything too. There's a man, there's a woman. So there's day, there's night. God didn't create one thing. And the world must realize that the Western way to life is not the only way. And this is what Africans themselves should sit around. And this is really my worry about most African leaders, that we feel that it is the Oxford economies or the Cambridge economies that we must follow before we can grow. If Chinese can develop a pattern after their own and they grew, who say Africa cannot do the same thing in driving a process, looking at its own peculiarities and working out models along those lines, and then we can grow our economy? It's possible. There are a lot of models that are working here in traditional African society. Look at, for example, if you go to the East, you see this apprenticeship type of structures you have. People can lease their children to go learn trade, for example. That's a model of economic growth that you see in a particular family, you can see a trend move. How are we going to begin to think out concepts outside of what the West wants us to do? This is a problem that African leaders must have to embrace, thinking differently, like the Chinese are doing. You must look for alternative. China, you will see, China, they are not aggressive. They're not looking for a colony. They're only looking for a market. And all they are doing is that you build something that is good, then you negotiate a market, you move into it. Otherwise, you can take your capital there and set up things there and ensure you develop a market and you bring in your people into it. They've done that successfully, even in terms of managing their social problem by exporting it to other people in the world. So you see, population is growing. People are going to be asking, Chinese need to come to your place. They can buy land, do everything, set up businesses, move people from China to come to your place and reduce social pressure in their place. As we are speaking now, China understands that population is growing. And now they are also investing hugely in hydroponic agriculture. They used to have a very big land. But today now there are certain zones in China where development cannot enter at all. It's preserved for the future. Now you can determine the kind of building that are going to be built there. They are all high-rises and they are all farmhouses. So all these are strategic way that the Chinese is evolving. And they are thinking around themselves and they are thinking within themselves how to challenge global competition. So whether we like it or not, cheap product will continue to come from China. Like I would say to anybody, whether of course it's Donald Trump who will come to put a 25% or 250% tariff on Chinese goods, the only people that will suffer will still be the people in America. Because at every point, their product will still be cheaper and they will still enter. So they will buy more. They will pay more to get it, of course, because the world is shrinking in terms of resource. And therefore, people will look for cheap things to buy. And China has been able to perfect that technology for cheap things. And therefore, they will remain the bride of the people of the world. Except that we're having people who come to challenge them. The people who have done that have been Russia. But Russia has spent greater part of their life since 1905 fighting wars. And therefore, they've not been able to invest heavily in building critical infrastructure that can drive economic processes.
So what are the potential challenges of this shift, coming back home for African nations to be specific?
Well, I don't think China has a problem with Africa.
Okay.
And I'm not also sure that these are designed for Africa. I think the issue really is with the West. The issue is that if you're going to create this problem for China in America or in Western Europe, because EU is saying, oh, they want to slam high tariff and sanction on some Chinese goods. I mean, China is going to retaliate also. So this is what it is. This retaliation will create more tension globally, but hopefully we don't see it blossoming into war, because before now, Chinese has not been thinking about warfare, but today we're also seeing a very sophisticated Chinese militarily. So it's not just about having to produce alone. China is also producing very high-end military equipment. So this, of course, is a kind of balance of power that will play out. That they call it in international relations mutual assured destruction. It's mad. That's where we are at the moment in the world. So you have the capacity, I have the capacity, then we'll come to a round table and negotiate our way around our problems.
Now, looking at this growing tension between China and especially the U.S., don't you think it's also important for China to deploy what we call diplomatic approach to looking at managing this tension and this suspicion around China? Because in months to come, you're going to have a new president who might likely, we can't really tell, but that will also determine the kind of relations between the U.S. and China. And when it comes to the world economy, the U.S. has a place, even though China has also repositioned itself as a force to reckon with. But given the fact that other nations are reacting, not just the U.S., you have France also raising some concerns, don't you think it's also important for Chinese to also look at a diplomatic way of handling this kind of tension and growing political tension that may arise with it, so that in the end, it will not be a loser for the whole world? Looking at the sensitivity of the position of China, we are talking about the largest second economy in the world.
You see, I feel in terms of diplomacy, I think Chinese are doing very well. They are doing excellently well. China diplomacy is best globally as we speak.
But wouldn't you, sorry to butt in, but wouldn't you perceive that for some, it might look like China is showing some level of, I don't want to use the word arrogance or self-confidence in the light of this statement, looking at the fact that no nation can exist in isolation?
No.
We're going to have a situation where the issue of self-sufficiency will occur in China or for the Chinese people, whereby the dependence on other nations will be reduced, but not likely. So that's why I'm asking, is it not important also to look at what may likely be the outcome of this in future if you have a new president in the U.S.? I hope it's not the man some people are thinking about who has been talking tough, how this might likely play out. So is it not important for China to see how to manage that tension now in a very diplomatic way?
No. You see, China is hugely very diplomatic. And they're dealing with the world with utmost sense of diplomacy. And everywhere you see China, China does not force itself on anybody, really, the way the West do, who insists that this is how things must be done, this is what you must do, and then try to see how to impose their civilization on the rest of the world. China has not done that. What China has always portrayed is the fact that there's an alternative way to life. That must not be the Western way to life. That they have a culture which is century old and superior in terms of the way the Chinese think. And this is what China has been doing. So they are in relation with almost all the countries in the world. And you see, for example, even in our own country here, China is even having a special department here in University of Lagos where Chinese culture are taught, where exchanges are happening between Nigeria and China. They are building these bridges all across the place. There's no place in the world you're going to get to you will not find it Chinese. They're not making trouble with anybody. The only people who are feeling that they are the superior race are the people really the issue, who would not want other people to grow. So what these people are saying is that, well, if you eventually block us out, then of course that does not mean the end of us. There must be an alternative way to survive. I don't think that is going to Trump, for example, becoming the president of America and say, oh, American first. I don't see how that can kill BRICS, who is also growing hugely in terms of economy. India is doing excellently well. Brazil is doing excellently well, except the African component of BRICS. So when you see these nations also coming together and they are building stronger bonds and they are thinking in terms of how to de-dollarize their economy, all this conversation will all be, at the end of the day, to the advantage of China because they have the technology and they have the people and they have the money.
Now, let's look at the African continent. Now, we'll make reference to Nigeria. You know, anything that happens to Nigeria could also influence the other part of Africa. We are the giant of Africa, and we're proud to say that. Now, let's look at the relationship that should exist between Nigeria and China. At a point, there was this idea of currency swap that should exist between Nigeria and China. You realize that most of the equipment and tools we use in Nigeria by manufacturers, most of them are imported from China, and the kind of business relation between these two countries is very huge. Why do you think this currency swap hasn't taken place or is not being looked at as a way of increasing the relation between these two countries? Look at what China is doing as regards industrial revolution. If there's what we call a kind of agreement as common currency or currency swap, which makes it easier, why has there been a kind of, a snake kind of approach to achieving this?
You see, some months ago, I had a conversation with an Indian friend of mine, and we were talking about how the world perceived China. You see, because there's a kind of a media blitz against China. Where people say, oh, we are suspicious of your aid, we are suspicious of your relations, Africa must be careful, the kind of thing they take from China, its enslavement and the rest of it. You have those propaganda right there they play in the media, that all the money that you take from China will entrap Africa as it were. But my Indian friend asked me a question and he said, why is it? It's not only in Africa that... the third world that are receiving aid from China. Why is the one that they are giving to the West succeeding and the one in Africa not succeeding? Then we must look at fundamental issues that are behind that. And what is the real fundamental issue here in Africa is the issue of greed, issue of selfishness, corruption, lack of transparency, and the rest of it. That somebody give you money to go and build a road, and you decide to use the money to go and marry more wife or buy new cars. And at the end of the day, of course, these are investments that will not produce results. they call it investment in the Bank of the North, as they used to say. So how are you going to be able to pay back? You won't be able to pay back. And this is why Chinese is doing it in such a way that, look, we are giving you money and it's tied to some certain infrastructure. If you are not able to run it, we can come and run it for you. So that's what people talk about, signing off their sovereignty. But nobody is going to give money to a profligate person who will waste it on things that are non-essential rather than building infrastructure. And this is what you see Chinese doing. I say, if you can't run it, we will manage it for you, because we know that there is potential for profitability. And that shouldn't be the problem of China. That should be the problem of the third world. Looking at the issues of the currency swap between Nigeria and China, that agreement was signed in the first instance in 2018. And of course, there was a lot of potentials in it. But the issue is a lot of the environment that was necessarily needed to be created by Nigeria to make that swap a success was not put in place. Take, for example, there is no direct flight from Nigeria to China. So if you have to go to China, it's either you go through Ethiopia, you go through Egypt, you go to Doha, you go to UAE. This is the way you can travel to China. And so if you want to buy that ticket, how are you going to buy it? You still need dollars. You won't buy it.
That's another bottleneck.
You buy it. So there will still be a need for dollar. And if you want to do transfers, of course, is also to see how acceptable is our bank card in China. So if I carry a Naira card, can I use it in China? Without necessarily have to take yuan from Nigeria in bulk and carry it to China. So all these things were not worked out by the CBN. So this is why you find that deal cannot really make progress. You see, people wake up every morning and we just say, oh, what's going to do? We just sign a deal without really necessarily looking at the feasibility, the workability of such policies. And therefore, it can really not deliver on its mandate. I think these are some of the bottlenecks that you find, that in terms of that trade between China and the yuan, we of course have needed to see if there's no such card movement. Then, of course, there must be some closure in the gap in terms of trade balance between China and Nigeria, which means Nigeria must be taking more goods to China and bringing from China. So in other words, if we sell to China, we receive yuan. Then if they sell to us, they take Naira. So that if we are trading, then there will be sufficient Naira in China and sufficient Naira yuan in Nigeria. But that's not happening. So we go with briefcase to China and then bring load back to Nigeria. So it's one-way trade. So these are the issues that, of course, have to be considered. And that is why, really, we have to emphasize that, see how can we make Nigeria really more productive as a people, to have so much thing to sell to the people of the world, and then you can earn dollar. Because if we are earning sufficient dollar, even this swap currency was not necessary.
I was going to ask you, Doctor, what is the opportunity for Nigeria as regards this shift? What opportunities do we have?
Well, I think there's a whole lot of opportunities if we really play our games very well. And this is having confidence in yourself and in your ability. There's so much that China, they are taking from us here. We can partner more with China. We can get into that deep relationship with China and see how we can also borrow technology from China, rather than allow them take raw things away from our soil. And we insist that they come to build structures here and do business here, rather than coming over, travel for 2 days to get to China to do business. And then they can repatriate their money here. And then Nigeria become like a hub to the entire of Africa. If we open up our space, we have the land and we have the market in terms of people. So that conversation can happen. So that if doors are closing against China in the West, and we can open our own and say, come. Because it's about our people. And this is how we have always lost opportunity as a people. You remember, at independence, remember in 1959 when Nigeria was preparing for independence, it was Russia first who said, oh, well, steel is our technology. We can build good steel for you. And we don't even need you to contribute. It will be our contribution to your independence celebration. And Nigerians say, oh, we don't want free gifts. We are non-aligned. We don't want to be part of Cold War. And therefore decided to hand over the building of steel to a bidder, and the France company won. And then the France company subletted it to a Russian company. And up to this time we are talking, the Ajakuta steel rolling mill is still a dream. We lost the opportunity that would have come to us for free. So we say we were not aligned because we don't want to be slaves to anyone. We want to be independent. And I think the leaders of Nigeria must realize that in politics, whether it is local politics or international politics, there are no permanent friends, there are no permanent enemies. What is permanent is interest. As long as you are making gain from a particular conversation, why don't you take it? I was sharing with Chooks yesterday. About 2 years ago, UAE wanted to buy 5G technology. And they were thinking, who do we buy it from? Do we buy from Motorola or do we buy from Huawei? And then, of course, they decided to say, okay, we will peg our tent with Huawei. And therefore, the American government said, okay, well, if you are buying from Huawei, we will not sell military aircraft to you. We won't sell to you. If you don't buy our 5G, we will not give you weapons. And then the people sat down and asked themselves, who are we fighting really? What do we need? Is this the aircraft we need, or is it the 5G we need? And they settled for 5G. So they went to China and buy their 5G. And they are living their life. Yes, you didn't give them aircraft, but since 2 years, are they fighting any war?
No.
There's no war. So, because these guys are making economic decisions that benefit their people. See, because we have so much attached interest to the West, whether it is in Paris or in London or in America, we don't want to break ties. But these guys are really enslaving us. So I feel really that leaders in Africa must be open to this alternative. Who says democracy is the only way to live? In short, as a matter of fact, really now, people are querying the fundamental principles of democracy that you call freedom, liberty. Does it really exist with democracy? All you see today really is just periodic elections. But when you go to certain places where laws are enforced, you see, like in China we are talking about, Tsar is going to be there for as long as he's alive. Strength will carry him. But does it remove from the prosperity that is coming to China? No, it does not. So I think Africa must begin to look inward also and say, how do we strategize and position ourselves in this global game so that we are not just taking the remnants that fall from the table of the superpower, that we also grow ourselves into superpower nation. Mind you, that Africa is the only continent in the world that still have about 60% of uncultivatable land. It's only Africa. It's not anywhere in Europe. It's not anywhere in Asia. It's only Africa that still have land that has not been touched. We have not even cultivated them at all. Now, this is an opportunity. This is an advantage for us, where Africa is going to be looking at how we're going to supply food to Europe, how we're going to supply food to America, how we're going to supply food to Asia, and that's all we are going to specialize in. And then we are taking return and making hard-earned revenue from what? China does not need to eat your cassava, but they are planting cassava because they know your market needs it.
There was a video where, we had them process cassava and sold it. Yeah. To European countries. Yeah. And then we had people lamenting, citizens of Nigeria lamenting and saying, look, this is what we're known for. Why are we not there yet?
Yeah, but you see, this is a problem. Again, it comes to how we think and do business here. which is, of course, the really fundamental problem in Africa, that when we are making so much money, we become reckless in terms of how we use those money without investing substantially in the goose that is laying the golden egg. That's been the problem. That was the bane around cocoa. That was the bane around groundnuts. That was the bane around palm oil. That was the bane around rubber. And this is also the bane around crude oil. Same trajectory. You look at it. When we were building cocoa, what were we doing? We just process the cocoa from the farm, take it to the port, and then we ship it abroad. We didn't invest in chocolate industry. Those in abroad were doing chocolate. We didn't add value to what we're doing here. So they return the chocolate to us.
And then we buy it.
Now, a whole lot is used on concentrates to do some of all these things without necessarily relying, because some of these chocolates are actually now being produced in the laboratory and the factory. So what are we going to get out of it? This is a problem. So people are doing a whole lot of things to see how to rethink, development. But African is just laid back.
Maybe because we have so many politicians rather than intellectuals who are capable of running.
I just think it's too many politicians. I just think it's a way of life that, once more money comes to you, what you think about now, you think about getting more side chick. So there's a whole lot that's happening to you. And then you can fly to Europe, go and catch a cruise, and then burn off the money, and then come back.
They're not progressive-minded.
So this is a problem. And when you look at how people elsewhere lived, it's quite different. I was saying to people, last week, when Lee Kuan Yew started to build Singapore, one of the things that happened to him was he said, okay, now we are going to make a law in Singapore that there will not be deficit budget. In other words, we will not borrow to fund our annual budget. It's a law in Singapore. And therefore, the minimum you can have is a balanced budget. In other words, all that you earn, you spend it. Now, when that law came in place, every successive government was struggling to get surplus. Now the question comes, what do we do with the surplus? And they made a new law that no new government can expend the surplus. And it's going to be in a sovereign wealth account. Then the money was growing. Now politicians were asking, what are we going to do with this surplus? They made a new law and said, we are going to invest the surplus. What are we going to be doing with the investment? If your government invests the surplus, you make money. Then you share it 50-50. Save 50 and then spend 50. Those laws are in place in Singapore. And that's why they have so much money that they can throw around, even though they are a very small country. Now, this is us. Remember when Okonjo-Iweala told us about sovereign wealth pause, and the governor took the same woman to Supreme Court, and Supreme Court ruled that it's our money, let us eat it. We ate the money, and then 1 year after, we were not able to pay salary. This is how we have been living.
All right. It bothers me when I hear this kind of narrative about my dear country and my dear Africa.
The giant of Africa.
But it's okay. It's okay. Let's wrap up this way. Doctor, I would like to remind you, while we were growing up, when you heard of Chinese products, what comes to mind is this could be inferior. But over the years, substandard, superior, inferior. But over the years, that has changed. What is the lesson here for Nigeria as regards perception, the way the world perceives us? And, the lesson from this, the perception about the Chinese products was being substandard, but now the narrative has changed. What lesson is that for Nigeria as regards perception, PR, telling our story?
As you were raising those questions, something really running in my head was a story at a beautiful gate where a certain cripple was lying, and then the apostle came and met them, and he said, we will give you, and the Bible says the man started to leap, then start to walk, and then start to run. Now, you see, that's a process in life, really. that is what we don't want to. Nobody grew up one day. Every of us were carried 9 months in our mother's womb, where we grew from one stage to another, and then we evolve, and this is who we are today. So we must understand that there is a process around things. I was speaking to this yesterday also, especially when we look at the conversation that is going on between the Dangote refinery and the regulators of the oils. And I said to them yesterday, even if those oil were substandard, as the NMDPR claimed, it's our own. We grew up to see Chinese, Taiwan product as inferior. But today,
they have improved.
They are now
without them.
The superior. So let us grow up. And there's no bad growing up. And this is the lesson that we must learn. That yes, let's learn to eat our mother's soup and enjoy the taste. Rather than go to Tasty Fried or KFC, where we spend money and then, of course, we come back again begging other people to help you.
I hope the sales department will come after you. But we must thank you for this narrative. Indeed, we're actually shaping policy here. Let's see what will come out of this. It's very crucial to talk about China because China is a force to reckon whether you like it or not. And they have said that whatever happens, China is going to focus on its affairs. So whatever happens to, we are going to focus.
Oh, yes, but look at it. They learn it through the reverse engineering.
Yeah.
China sees what you have produced, take it to their factory, pieces it, study it, and reproduce
Look at what they are doing with electric vehicles and all that.
So that is what it is. I was lamenting the other day when somebody was saying, I said, when is our university that are doing electrical engineering, and we are still complaining that NEPA is giving us bill, and yet we are training the electrician that is supposed to give electricity to the world. I think there's a whole lot we can learn from China, that it's just not about us putting structures on ground that replicate what other people are doing. It's also to ensure that the outcome from those structures really reflect what we want. If we want to be world-class people, we must train our people well. Investment in education in Nigeria is critical, and indeed the entire of Africa. That education should not just be merely reading and writing, that we are training computer scientists who do not know what a hard drive looks like. Let's not build one. We are training engineers who cannot, mechanical engineers who cannot even repair a car, let alone build a model. Our education must become functional such that we can become competitive. These people, they are not more intelligent than us. They are not cerebral than us. All we just need is to put our hands together, that someone don't sit in one corner and take what belongs to the rest of us and allow the system to suffer and die.
Doctor, you are really shaking the table, but I know Africa will get better and bigger.
It's our prayer.
We must thank you for your time, your commitment and
very
your
much,
thoughts on this development.
Thank you, Shadi. It was nice being by your side this morning.
Lovely. I guess this is where we have to call it a program on today's edition of Early Extinct. Don't forget the conversation continues on our social media platform at SOUQ News TV, where you can share your view as regards the development between China and the rest of the world, and also what Nigeria can benefit from the economic model being deployed by China when it comes to industrial revolution. Don't forget, Market Insight comes up at 11, and Early Extinct, you will always return bigger and better. I am Femi Ayodele. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow. Shade.
And I am Shade Uwe. And like the doctor said, let's leave the theories aside and focus on practicabilities in Nigeria. Bye for now.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.